He's talking about removing more than 10 million people from this country who have been here, many of them since they were little children, contribute to this society, contribute to this economy, live in all of our neighborhoods and communities. And now we're throwing balloons around as if this is a party. He talked about the Democrats, again, cheating. Cheat was the word he used in the last election, after saying he was here to unify the nation. And it's a bizarre feeling that I'm not sure I'm able to fully articulate right now. They're painting it as a party, but it is a deeply divisive message, any way you want to look at it.
Hi again, everybody. It is 5 o'clock now in New York. I'm Ayman Mohyeldin in today for Nicole Wallace. Unity be damned. Apparently, if you thought what Donald Trump did say last night was enlightening enough, just wait until you hear what he and the presence of mind not to say with the country watching. He took no victory lap on the topic of reproductive rights, for instance, even after conservatives spent decades trying to overturn Roe versus Wade. That particular issue was conspicuously absent from Trump's speech. So, too, was talk of the January 6 defendants, or as Trump calls them, hostages. Trump has praised the people he sent to attack the Capitol in that rally after his speech. But again, in speaking to a broader audience last night, that topic was somehow left out of it, absent. No mention of it. But perhaps no subject was more noticeably absent than Project 2025. The Heritage Foundation manifesto, the roadmap, the wholesale plan of destruction of the U.S.'s federal government. Of course, while many of that plan's dystopian themes were inherent in Trump's comments, as we heard there, mass deportations, as Jacob Soboroff mentioned, the disgraced ex-president has recently sought to separate himself from Project 2025. And that's despite the fact that the plan, cooked up with the help of former aides, was being promoted mere blocks from the RNC this year. All this is evidently a sore subject for the Trump campaign. Listen to what senior advisor Chris LaCivita told Politico's Jonathan Martin.
The president has made it clear these people do not speak for him. They do not speak for the campaign.
Yeah.
And I love the fact
you
that
call them grifters. You call them grifters.
The campaign. The campaign.
What do you mean?
The campaign. Well, yeah.
They're
the
grifters.
Campaign is 100% focused on. We're the ones that are putting out the policy.
They're hurting your campaign. You think?
Look, I think that in the perfect world, from their perspective, they would love to drive the issue set, but they don't get to do that. Now, you guys sure as hell give them a lot of leeway because you're always writing the Trump campaign is going to start with the next Trump.
They're hurting your campaign.
The next Trump.
They're
campaign,
jamming you.
No, they're a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
All right, so the Trump campaign can try to distance itself from Project 2025 all at once. But to borrow some advice from our colleague Rachel Maddow, watch what they do, not what they say, because the truth is abundantly clear. And that is where we start this hour with Republican strategist and MSNBC political analyst Mike Murphy, plus writer and editor for Protect Democracy, Amanda Carpenter joins us as well. And the Rev is still with us. Amanda, talk to us about what Project 2025 is and what the Heritage Foundation's role is and the overlap between the former Trump officials and advisors who served him, who know him, and their role in drafting this manifesto that is believed to overturn our democracy as we know it.
Yeah, sure. Here's the thing that I think a lot of people get confused about Project 2025. Project 2025 isn't designed to run Trump, right? What Project 2025 is the product of is the product of a lot of conservatives hearing the, sort of, I don't know how else to say it, but insane rhetoric that came out of the first Trump administration and after that, and finding a way to make it a reality. So like when Donald Trump says, I want to use the Department of Justice to target my political enemies, Project 2025 lays out the intellectual policy work to make that come true. And that is done through things like gutting the idea of independence at federal agencies. In other words, making it so that a president can exercise his leverage on the attorney general and reducing those guardrails that existed. And the thing that melds Donald Trump and Project 2025 together is this agreement that should the next Republican take power, they have a mandate for leadership. That is the title of the Project 2025 document, Republican Mandate for Leadership, to take full control of the federal government and use every tool at the executive's disposal to advance their agenda, right? It is a systematic policy way to gut the checks and balances that stop Trump from exercising his most unlawful powers that he wanted to in his first term. You look at something like the way he held up funding for Ukraine that led to his first impeachment, right? So there's like this weird law at GAO that called impoundments, right? So GAO says you can't do that. It's this thing called impoundments. You're not supposed to do it. Well, what Heritage does and Project 2025 has put together is, okay, we're just going to get rid of that. We're going to make it so what was not allowed in the first Trump administration, we're going to find a way to grease the skids to do that in his second term. So there's nothing to stop him from holding up funding to exercise as leverage to advance his agenda. That is what it does. Instead of having any breaks in the system, this greases the skids so that Trump can essentially make good on his idea when he goes forth and tells reporters at the Washington Post and everyone else, I have Article 2 power to do whatever I want. Project 2025 is a plan to make that come true.
Mike, you know, I'm pretty confident. I'm willing to bet a lot on the fact that Donald Trump has not read Project 2025. He could not possibly read a document that is that long, about 600 plus pages. But he did say earlier this month online that he knew nothing about Project 2025 and that he had no idea who was behind it. First of all, do you buy that, or is this a response more in line with I hardly knew this guy strategy that he has employed before, when in reality he knows exactly what it's all about? Mike?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
No worries.
A hiccup of technology here. No, I don't think he reads anything. I think he's vaguely aware of the thrust of it, and I think he's like, well, the people who wrote it are my people. They'll come up with something good. But no, do I think it's the absolute blueprint? No, I don't really. Campaigns are full of these kind of things, but it does show a troubling outlook. It's kind of the dream journal of a bunch of his people who he empowered to be his people. So do I actually think it'll come true if he's president? No, but I think the bad intent behind it is troubling, and parts of it could come true. But do I think he has a strong grip on the details? No, I do not.
Yeah, I mean, it seems...
I just want to lay a point there. What is most interesting is, if I've read the whole Project 2025, I've also read in detail Agenda 47, which is Trump's very campaign platform. It's laid out in great detail on his website. And what was really interesting is that around the fall of 2022, right after he announced that he was going to run, but before he announced his campaign to run in 2023, Trump was trying really hard to convince the conservatives at places like Heritage and otherwise to stay with him, right? There was a chance that they were going to get behind DeSantis, but there was a jockeying. There was competition going on behind the scenes about who was going to be the guy next. And what was happening is, during that time, Trump was coordinating with people that were writing Project 2025. And if you look at Agenda 47, the things that Trump has said in his own speeches, and I take him pretty seriously when he's actually scripted and saying these things, because those have a pretty darn clear chance of coming true, talking about specific things about how he will leverage the power of the federal government to attack his enemies and also make people loyal to him. He's talking about withholding federal funding for schools that exercise vaccine mandates, or investigating teachers in universities because they teach DEI, whatever they deem that to mean. Yeah. He said those things. And this idea that it just won't happen in a second term because they don't know how, well, that is why Project 2025 is there, because the conservative movement did recognize that they didn't get all that they wanted. He was stymied in his first administration. And so they have spent their time in the wilderness examining exactly how they will not be stopped again.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm old enough to remember when Trump in 2016 promised to ban Muslims, or to build the wall, or overturn Roe versus Wade, or move the embassy to Jerusalem. And he followed through on all of those things because he said he was going to do those things. So we should definitely take him at his word when he says he wants to do the things that Amanda there was talking about in Agenda 47. Mike, Trump might not have mentioned Project 2025. President Biden, to his credit, in his response to the speech, wrote about it today, saying Trump avoided mentioning his Project 2025 agenda, but still proudly flaunted the worst of MAGA extremism. Americans know exactly where he wants to take this country. I look forward to getting back on the campaign trail next week to continue exposing the threat of Donald Trump's Project 2025 agenda while making the case for my own record and the vision that I have for America, one where we save our democracy, protect our rights and freedoms, and create opportunity for everyone. Mike, Trump may not want to be associated with Project 2025. It's obvious that the Democrats seem eager to prevent him from making that distinction and making sure he wears it wherever he goes.
Yeah, no, it's a tactic for the Democrats. Look, we found the evil plan. And there are plenty of evil plan capable people around Trump. The question is, how long of a leash will he give them? Because I don't think Trump ever reads, any policy plan. We know Trump is a populist, and we know he's transactional. So he will, if it's popular, he'll stick with it. If it has a lot of opposition, he may back off. So I'm not a Project 2027 originalist. That said, the very fact that he has policy people close to him who come up with stuff like this is very, very troubling. The very fact that Trump isn't a detail guy means God knows what they will be able to get away with in a Trump administration if they're not watched. So I think it's a fairly smart move by the Biden people to make it famous. It's become a rallying cry in the partisan Democrat world. But I wouldn't be surprised if this thing starts to catch traction, the Democratic attacks, and Trump says, no, I'm not doing that, and he'll just back right off it. But that also doesn't mean Trump won't have the same people who came up with it in positions of power in the government. So I think the realistic take on it is a warning sign of bad intent, which should be taken quite seriously.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.